Hi everyone, so today we're going to be looking at how to pass the case study, and this video assumes that you have some knowledge already from college as to what the case study is all about. I just want to make a disclaimer that this video is not a complete record of how to pass the case study, but it highlights the key concepts that you need to be aware of. Okay, and it just gives my general advice. Now, there are some basic exam techniques that you need, to pass a case study. You need to understand the time limits. You need to understand who you are. So you might be a member of a firm, member of an advisory firm, and you're giving advice to the client. And you need to understand what's required of each requirement, okay? What might come up in each requirement and what's needed, what the format is for the executive summary. Okay, so there are three, just a reminder, there are three requirements and there's one executive summary which goes at the front of the report. And that executive summary summarizes your findings from each requirement. Okay, now let's look at requirement 1 firstly. So this is evaluating the performance. Okay, performance in the year. And most of that data is going to come from our P&L movements. Okay. Now, to have a good answer, you need financial and non-financial data. Okay, so you need maybe the number of clients in the year, number of sites in the year. You need to analyze revenue branch by branch. Okay. Now, try and include as many metrics as possible that you're going to use for your further analysis. And what you're doing is you're bringing in, you can bring in a lot of information from your advanced information and the exhibits. Okay, so the exhibits are the pieces of information you're given in the exam. You should bring in comparatives into the exam that you can easily refer to, and that are presented in a format that you can use in the exam. So when I say comparatives, I mean prior year results. And what I'd say understand, also have other metrics on there, like revenue per site, number of tenders in the year, tender price per site. If the comparatives are in a presentable way, easy to understand way, you will speed up the process of typing up the appendix. Okay, so that's how you can save time in the exam, is to have a good Excel spreadsheet summarizing the key data. Another thing to be aware of is that you should understand how the company has performed in relation to its industry, and how has the company performed in relation to its targets. Okay, because those are points that you can elaborate on in the exam. Okay, another thing you can also understand is the percentage market share, if they give you this data. And basically it's all about understanding why the results are the way they are. Why is GPM down and why is OPM down? Okay, now you can't overspend time on this requirement. There's so much to put in, but it's about distributing your marks across the different areas of the mark scheme. Okay, now the first thing you need to do to manage your time effectively is to split the requirement into sub-requirements. Okay, so you have to split them. Each sub-requirement has to be addressed, but you should split it into 3. Think of it as 3 sub-requirements. Okay, so if you have 5 sub-requirements, you have to divide them into 3. Let me give an example. So for one of the exam papers I looked at, they had revenue as one sub-requirement, cost of sales, gross profit margin, distribution costs, and operating profit margin. Okay, and that was 5 requirements, but obviously you can group 2 of them together. Cost of sales and GP go very well together, and distribution and operating profit margin go well together. Revenue, there's always a lot to say about revenue, and it's more standalone. Okay, so it requires a bit of judgment, but revenue is generally going to be standalone. Okay, so the first category of marks is assimilating information. This is where you're getting information from other sources and just stating the facts. So I'm just going to put state. So where does the information come from? Well, firstly, you'll get the information from your management information, so the performance in the year, P&L, you'll get that. And you get marks for your appendix, where you're looking at the variances between current year and prior year. So you have a column, you should have a column for pounds, and then you have a column for percentage. Simple. You don't really need balance sheet at all. You never need balance sheet really. You get some marks for total figures, movements in total figures like revenue, cost of sales, distribution costs, and you get some information from any information you've noted from the advanced information, like COVID, for example, like mentioning that there's COVID or changing in demographics, seasonal business. Okay, so you can get marks quite easily for this, and I'm going to put 4 marks here because I'm showing you that 4 marks because there aren't too many marks available for the simulating stage. Now, structuring problems and solutions is basically doing more calculations in detail, okay? And this time it is split between the sub-requirements, so you can maybe get 4 or 5 marks here. Think of it like that. 4 or 5 marks. 4 or 5 marks. Okay, so there are actually more marks for structuring problems and solutions, so maybe we can say there are 12 here. That might not be the number of marks, but I'm just telling you how I'm thinking about it. So this is where you're doing further analysis of the data, you're doing a bit more number crunching, you're trying to understand what the movements are. Now, you probably know this already, I'll just reiterate, but when you're stating movements and figures, you should state the percentage movement and the pounds movement, the actual movement, okay? Otherwise you won't get the mark. Applying judgment, okay, is the next stage, and that's where you're analysing why figures are the way they are. Okay, so you're thinking about whether the movements are good or bad, basically. What do you think in your professional judgment? Okay, so compared to prior year, firstly gets you a mark for revenue. You need to understand the reasons for the performance in revenue. Why has it gone up or gone down? Is it because of a particular category of good? Easy marks you can get in revenue are understanding, have the targets been met, and how does the revenue compare to industry standards? Okay, so you can get at least 3 marks. Premeditate that you can get these 3 marks, okay? Now, cost of sales and GP percentage might be more difficult. It's understanding what the inefficiencies are. So why is it might be no bonus, cost GP percentage might have gone down because there are no bonuses, or there's some discounts, okay? It might have gone down because additional costs are not being passed on to customers. So because of the customers that you're using, they're inefficient, so you're having to incur extra costs. Okay, so trying to understand these points will get you these marks here. This one is fairly self-explanatory. It's understanding for, say, operating profit margin. Why is the operating profit margin fallen, and what are the inefficiencies? Are there any indications of inefficiencies? And then conclusion. So conclusion itself has, I think, 4 or 5 marks, and recommendations. And recommendations has 4 or 5 marks. So conclusion is about understanding why revenues increased, how much total revenues increased, and why. So in this conclusion, you're addressing each sub-requirement. So I'm going to put 3 here just to remind you that you're addressing each sub-requirement. And the recommendations are not specific. You don't have to write a recommendation for each sub-requirement. You just have to write recommendations that make sense. Like investigate the inefficiencies and cost of sales, or improve delivery times, or invest in better quality equipment so that you can win customers. Okay? So try and address all these points. Try and address all these points, okay? It's trying to hit enough marks on each of these on these grids. Okay, you won't get all of them, or you'll get enough. You can easily get enough to pass this requirement. Okay, the next requirement is normally to do with evaluating two potential suppliers. This is just an example of one that can come up, or evaluating two proposals. So because obviously it's accounting, there's going to be some numerical analysis, and each company will have a way of evaluating its suppliers. So there'll probably be a calculation for profit or returns or whatever. That will you can find that particular calculation in the advanced information. The point of this analysis is going to tell you who's the more efficient of the suppliers and who's the more profitable. Okay, but it's not just understanding the figures, it's also understanding who's the better quality. Quality, maybe. What do you want from a supplier? You want them to be fairly close by. You want them to be adaptable. So if you have an order at the last minute, you want them to be able to supply. You might, for a supplier, you would want to know lead times. You want to know ethics as well, because you don't want to be associated with a supplier that maybe uses is associated with negative publicity, because that's going to devalue your own brand. Okay, so it's thinking about the obvious. Now for requirement 2, the difficulty is understanding what the assumptions are. So in the numerical analysis you undertake, there are probably going to be some assumptions, and you're probably going to have to estimate some figures. Now you have to assess whether these are reasonable. Okay? And one thing I've just thought about, you can assess whether they're reasonable by doing comparisons with previous analyses that have been done by the company. So sometimes they've done an analysis already of another supplier. You can assess whether those are, therefore whether the assumptions are reasonable. Okay, so here maybe also look at requirement 1. Maybe look at requirement 1 and see whether you compare any data from the numerical analysis you've done to the actual performance in requirement 1. So try and link them two together, requirement 1 and requirement 2, because there might be lots of marks you can get. But let's have a look at the split in requirement 2. So again, there are probably going to be multiple sub-requirements, but you have to split them into 3. Okay, so there will be maybe the calculation of the metric, the assumptions, and sometimes they might have a third issue, like conversion of, they want to convert some space. They want to convert some space to be used for another purpose. Okay. Now again, you're going to get marks for doing a basic appendix, which is where you're looking at comparative figures. Okay. And you're bringing in information from the advanced information. Okay. So trying to bring in as much detail information as possible, really. So trying to hit those, you can easily get those marks. Structuring problems generally is about, for the finance side of it, is doing more difficult calculations. Okay, so arriving at your final figures, like in GP percentage, for example. Assumptions obviously is about what the assumptions are. And the third issue is what are the issues. Okay, so what are the actual issues? Applying judgment is then about what are the limitations of the assumptions. Okay, so we finished with the metric. It's looking at which additional costs are not included. Any economies of scale is not factored in. Okay, so maybe compared to any previous analyses. Okay, like they might have done a similar analysis for another supplier in the advanced information. Okay, so trying to compare, basically applying judgment is about comparison as well. Right? So think of comparison, like compared to actual data, like compared to maybe performance in requirement 1 if you can. That's how you're going to hit those marks. Now, next one, applying judgment, is understanding, is the issue Like, for example, you're converting the space and you want to know the issues. Is it in line with consistent with the strategy of the company? Do the risks outweigh the benefits? Opportunity costs. So what are you losing out on? Are you going to lose out on the business of a potentially lucrative? Are you going to lose out on the current operation that you're using, on the revenue from that? Okay, so it's understanding that. Do the benefits? It's basically understanding, do the risks outweigh the benefits? And then conclusion. Again, we're following the 1-3-3-1 model. So conclusion is spread across all three requirements, sub-requirements. So obviously you're going to address each sub-requirement in the conclusion. Okay, and it's about understanding obviously which supplier is the best one, which one would you go for, what the way forward is, and are the assumptions overall reasonable from the model that you used? What are the key limitations? Okay, so this one, conclusion is about your own thoughts. What are the assumptions reasonable? What are the key limitations, etc.? And then recommendations, obviously, recommendations put at least 4 or 5 points because you can get, try and maximize your marks from this. Okay, so negotiate terms and conditions, do further analysis, do due diligence, okay? Any sensible recommendation will get you good marks on this. And then finally, we have requirement 3, which is normally an evaluation of a proposal. Okay, so you might want to set up a new site, or you might want to enter into agreement with another provider. And this one can be quite fun, but you're probably running out of time in the exam, so you might perform worse on this requirement compared to the others. And that's, remember, time limits, you need to stick to your time. Okay, so in this sub-requirement, we probably might have to understand financial, operational, strategic risks and benefits. Should the proposal be accepted? Any ethical and business trust aspects of the arrangement, okay? So there's going to be ethics in this exam. Now again, we need to split it into 3 sub-requirements. So we have maybe financial on one side. Operation and strategic normally go together, and then ethics and business trust go together. Okay, so assimilating information, you'll probably have to do you'll get some marks for basic calculations. You'll probably get some marks from, as again, bringing information from the advanced information and from the exam paper itself. Try and mention any general issues like COVID or changing dynamics, okay, and that will maximize your marks in this area of the exam. Okay? Structuring problems and solutions. So for the first sub-requirement, it's going to be about doing more difficult calculations. For the second one, it's going to be what are the risks? What are the actual risks? Okay, so ethics and business trust are actually what the issues are. And to maximize your marks, think about negative publicity. Think about damage to brand reputation. Think about transparency. Would people want transparency? Maybe you can use the transparency effect, fairness model. Have we broken any laws? Okay, so ethics is about complying with laws and regulations as well as just following general judgment. Okay. Now, applying judgment can be a bit trickier. Financial risks and benefits, obviously you're trying to assess whether the move is going to significantly improve performance, okay? So bring in information from requirement 1 here. So applying judgment, I'm going to put comparison, okay? So if is the revenue going to be increased by 10%? How does the revenue compare to the current performance? Okay. See if you can compare to any other proposals or any other data in the AI, okay? Like, I don't know, the move might increase your revenue by 10%, but another company has grown by 5%. I'm not sure, but basically when you think of applying judgment, think of comparison. Now, when I was looking at the marks scheme for last year, I got a bit confused because they put benefits in to... they put risks into SBS, and they put benefits in applying judgment for the operational strategic risks and benefits. Now, benefits is all about you thinking for yourself, what are the benefits of it? So it could enhance reputation, it could give us access to a clientele that we didn't have before, potential maybe discounts from doing trade continuously, I'm not sure. So it's about you thinking with your own initiative really to get marks on this. Maybe just do, yeah. For ethics, it's all about also maybe again for AJ, also understanding is it line with the goals and strategy of the company, alignment of goals and strategy. Try and compare to industry. Okay, so applying judgment, try and is basically understanding how does it compare to benchmarks. Okay, let's move on to ethics and business trust as before. So we have to assess whether the move is in line with our ethos. Can the brand be devalued, and can our company lose its reputation? Can there be significant negative publicity associated with the move? Applying judgment is also for ethics about what we do next. So we have to do some due diligence probably. We have to investigate further. Okay, so applying judgment is a bit different here. It's about what to do next. Now, conclusion, again, is the same. So we conclude on each sub-requirement. So what are the key financial risks and benefits? What are the key O&S? What are the key ethical business trust and issues? And how do we proceed? How do we proceed, basically? Recommendations, try and put as many as you can, maybe 4 or 5. That's what I try to do. So you might need to put due diligence, negotiate terms and conditions. Just put as many as you can think of, okay? And in that way you would have addressed all the requirements. Now next we have is executive summary. So I think of it as three different categories of marks. So you have your general marks, which are for spelling, format. Okay, so the format of the report has to follow the one that is required. So you normally, I think, have 2 from. Okay, and those people have to be correct. And then you have subheadings. Okay. Now, what I would say is that might be worth having this information in your open book, like having what format you're going to use for your executive summary, because then you can just do a copy and paste exercise. The report has to be obviously from the correct person to the correct people and in the correct format, and you get marks for using formal language. Okay, so that's the general. Specific is where you conclude on all sub-requirements to do with each requirement. Okay, so cost of sales has moved up because of this. So you explain the actual movement and then you say because. And what feeds into recommendations as well, and conclusion and recommendations, is you have to put in what's the way forward going to be. Way forward. Okay, and put in any other relevant recommendations you can think of. So requirement 2 is whether we accept proposal or reject. Accept, reject. Okay, so that's basically it really. It's trying to give a balanced answer, basically addressing each requirement well enough, but not necessarily exceptionally well enough. Okay, and if you're fairly good at doing analysis, then you can do very well on this paper. And it's not overcomplicating it really. It's understanding, as we said before, what's required in an executive summary. It's also understanding basically that there are 3 sub-requirements for each requirement. Okay, and it's best to group them together and understand what those are. And also it's just following the time limits as well. That's where people mess up on, is timing. They have the knowledge, but they overspend time on requirement 1. And try and avoid that if you can. So everybody, hope that was useful. You can get a mark well above 50% in this paper. I mean, I got 66, so it wasn't, it wasn't exceptional, but it was much, it was good enough. Well, it was great talking to you, and hope you have a good day, as always. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye.